Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the second installment in the IMP Finance webinar series. I'm Will Jordan. I'm CEO and co-founder at IMP, and we are joined by Tom, who will introduce himself.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I'm Tom. I'm the MAP product specialist with a focus on finance and purchasing. So looking forward to today's webinar and showing you what we've been up to.
Thank you, Tom. Known internally as the Oracle of all things MAP finance software and the undisputed world-renowned expert in all things MAP finance. So no pressure, Tom. Look, thanks everybody for taking the time out to join this session. The team asked me not to do another accountant joke because they've been getting pretty bad. I've been scraping the barrel. Well, there's one more. I don't know if I've got another one because I'm really at the end of the repertoire. But it's not particularly topical. I was saving this for Christmas, but it just gives a sense of how much I am shaping the barrel to kick off these webinars. So how would an accountant measure the weight of Santa's sleigh? They would, of course, use net present value. I'm glad Tom's off camera because I'm sure his eyes will be rolling. There we go. I'm glad that's out of the way. Hope you enjoyed that one as much as all of the other jokes that were equally as terrible. We've got one more webinar left in this series, which will be the full product walkthrough, and I think I'm going to have to hang up the accountant's jokes at that point. But anyway, we'll get cracking. So look, thanks very much again for joining this webinar. So this is the second in the IMP Finance series, where we go into the kind of core fundamentals around finance system functionality. It's a very exciting one for us, both from a webinar perspective, but also as a product development perspective. Myself and a lot of the team at IMP are basically finance system nerds, and going through this journey and building out a MAP finance system based off all of the combined experience that we have as a team in the MAP finance space, along with all of the thoughts and ideas from all of you wonderful customers, is a really exciting proposition. And you know, we're very close to getting customers live, and as you'll see today, really starting to take shape. So before I go into the specifics, just as a recap, you know, our trajectory as a provider is very much around creating the first unified MAP finance platform. We started with the budgeting piece, the forward-looking strategic planning, IMP Planner. We then expanded that further into the resource planning piece around IMP ICFP, and we're now in the finance space. And you know, it was always the plan from day one to create the unified finance platform and do it in a way where there is no integration, okay? There is no overnight syncs. There is no building different things and bolting them together. It is a single unified platform, and therefore data is available in all those different parts. And elements from one system can impact and benefit areas of the other system. And hopefully you'll see again today how more of those overlaps just have a compounding, make much more sense as we go. Obviously, as part of IMP Finance, the first part that we released last year was around the purchase to pay, so IMP Purchasing, which it's fair to say is really changing the lives of a number of MAPs that were previously struggling with their approach to purchase to pay. Lots of functionality in there, really tying spend to the budget, making sure that spend is coded effectively, but also some really nice functionality like enabling invoices to be processed before the GRN has been done, okay? Lots of you will be struggling with a process where you get an invoice, go to process it, can't do it because the GRN hasn't been done, got to go and contact that person, ask them to do the GRN. In the interim, the invoice sits in a pile or on a spreadsheet, and then next week you check the pile of invoices to see if they've been GRN'd, and it's just a circle of pain. Whereas we design a system to not work like that. The invoice inputter's job is to input invoices. Whether that has or hasn't been delivered is not the invoice inputter's problem. That is a system status, and that will drive a system workflow. Now, that is only one example of functionality. but hopefully gives you a sense of the level of thought that we've put into that design and really trying to solve those long-standing challenges that map finance systems have faced. If you go on our website, there's lots more information about IMP purchasing. We've got plenty of webinars that we can share with you if you wanted to see how the functionality work. And you can also see 3 logos there on screen. So 3 of our early adopters have very kindly given us some case studies to just describe kind of the experience that they've had to date and the impact that the IMP purchasing is already having in their organization. What's underpinned all of our development? I'm not going to dwell on this because I know I talk about it every time, but it is still the thing that we focus on time and time again. All of the finance systems that you are currently using have been fudged to work for a mat-ish. And that's either because they're a big system that works with lots of different verticals and industries, and they've tried to make that work in a mat perspective, or you're at the other end of the spectrum, where you've got a system that works well in a school, but when you then add multiple schools together and centralization and shared balance sheets, it really starts to fall down. And what we have ultimately done is make sure we give you the depth of functionality that you need as a mat and the freedom to operate how you need as a mat, but without making it overly complex. Okay, for so many of you, adding a new budget holder to your purchase ordering system takes an age. Changing a security role then needs to be updated across 50 or 300 people. You know, things take a huge amount of time because you're doing it in a way the system wasn't designed to support, whereas everything we've done has been from the ground up designed for your specific needs. Budgets obviously have a massive input on everything that we do, and a very core part of our kind of product philosophy is that any product that we build has to make Planner stronger. Planner is the forward-looking strategic planning tool, and anything else that we build needs to supplement that, make planning better, but also can be made easier because of the budget data we hold. And obviously finance falls firmly in that position, and a lot of the focus is around just getting rid of that miscoding challenge. You've got budgets that sit here, actuals end up down here. Half of your month end is spent trying to understand where you really are and moving things around to match. That all disappears when you're using the budget lines to drive that spend in the first place. So this is today the second of our webinar series. I'm just going to do a quick recap on what we covered in the first one, which was November the 5th, where we did the initial reveal. So what we focused there was very much around kind of look and feel, so you could get a sense of how it looks from a design perspective, and how it's going to feel for users. We also dove in on our thinking around inquiries and analysis. You know, reporting is obviously a big deal, but there's just a requirement with finance systems to do inquiries and analysis, to run trial balances, to run account balance listings, make that account balance drillable by nominal code. Let me see a summary of my credit notes by department and location. You know, all of these ad hoc questions that you're asking your data all the time, we showed you how we're approaching that, and it's all system native to do all of those inquiries. And then last, but definitely no means least, you know, the core of any finance system is the chart of account structure. We've worked really hard to make sure we've got enough depth to accommodate all of the variations that you guys handle out in the big bad world of education finance. And just to dig in on that, this is what it looks like from an I&E perspective. So every line has a school, it has a finance code, it has a primary account / department, and it has the option of a fund. Okay, so 4 levels of dimension off the bat. That's pretty typical for all the systems that you use. But there are also extra things that you often do or need to do. And for example, we can post your salary journal by person, but it also goes to the salary cost center. We can make sure that your trips, income and expenditure, is both attributed to the department that's running that trip. So this is a history trip, but this is also actually a supplement based off the People Premium Fund, and the actual trip is a trip to the museum. So we've got 3 levels of analysis on that transaction there to say, yes, this expenditure is history because it's a history trip. It's actually a Pupil Premium trip subsidy, so it needs to go against the Pupil Premium Fund, and it's the museum trip. 3 individual bits of analysis, and you can see that the way we've structured it, you can have up to 5 levels of additional analysis for all of those types of purposes. And the last one is a typical estate spend. Okay, so yes, I'm doing some buildings improvements in my estates department. It's a restricted fund, but actually the project is the sports hall refresh. but the individual asset is the AC unit. Hopefully that just gives you a bit of a flavour of what we've settled on for our chart of accounts design, giving you that flexibility to do the analysis that you need, but in a fixed way, okay? Everybody has the same structure, and we can build all of our reports, all of our functionality, and all of our workflows to know these things exist, and therefore they will always work. And that's a key challenge. A lot of systems that are designed for big companies will end up having the approach of, okay, well, here are the ability to do whatever workflows you want. But because the chart of accounts isn't standardized, you can have different maps looking differently. And therefore, each of those workflows need to be set up and maintained differently. We've got that standardization because we only work with multi-academy trusts. Beyond the I&E and onto the balance sheet, we've got the same principle. So you can do additional analysis. So you can do, okay, obviously I can do my trade creditors by school and by supplier. I can do my net wages control account by school. I can also do it by person. So I can analyze my payroll control accounts by person if I wish. If you don't want trip income and expenditure going anywhere near the I&E because it messes up your management accounts reports, put it to the balance sheet. Put the income as a deferral, put the expenditure as a prepayment, and the same analysis survives, right? So I've got a prepayment trip code that's still linked to my history account. It's still people premium, and it's still a museum trip. So you've got the same analysis potential on the balance sheet as you do on the I&E. So that's a bit of a summary. We've got we can share that webinar with anybody that wants to see it if you did miss it. But the topic for today, and I'm just kind of come circling back to this because this is the launch plan that we set out back in the summer when we did our announcement and kind of launched the timeline, and we've stuck to it. Okay, so November 25 was the reveal where we covered all of those aspects. But today we're looking at foundations, which is, it's the meat of a finance system. Today we're looking at bank recs. Okay, today we're looking at VAT returns, and we're looking at payment runs. And you will start to understand how we've designed these functionalities, incorporating all of the things you currently struggle with or currently need and don't have within your current supplier. For example, VAT, it's 100 and VAT 126 ready. Bank recs, of course, it's open banking compliance, so it's got auto bank feeds for all your statements. Payment runs, you can do it for one school, you can do it for all schools, whether you've got a centralized purchase ledger or a purchase ledger per school or a purchase ledger per hub. Doesn't matter, you can do what you want and all of that works. So Tom is going to take you through that very shortly. Next up is we've got the full system walkthrough on the I think it's the 5th of March. There is a webinar QR code that I'll share at the end. But then from a launch perspective, we're going to be getting customers and early adopters beta testing in the March and April period, with a couple of early adopters going live in May, June. But the predominant build period is that June, July, August, ready for the main cohort that are going live in 1st of September. Okay. Actually, one thing I wanted to highlight as well, because a question we get, which is obviously a really valid question, is, okay, well, look, what's not going to be there? What functionality are you committing to for the 1st September, and what's not going to be there? What's later? So I just wanted to be really specific around that. So we're very clear. September 26 is absolutely a core finance system that does everything you need from a core finance system. That's going to have all your direct bank feeds and your open banking. Document workflows, so you can get your payroll journal on approval, you can get approvals on your payment runs. Period end routines that enable you to shift unauthorized invoices. There's always that challenge. We're trying to close the period, but there's a load of invoices in there that haven't been approved. What do we do about those? We got a solution. That's going to be there. VAT returns, payment runs, obviously all of those things are there. But the bits that we're focusing on as part of phase 2, which we're assuming will be January, is around the automated features. Okay, so we're focusing on exclusively on making sure that core functionality is absolutely bang on and does everything you need as a trust. And then phase 2 is around that automated piece that is very, very important to us, and we've got really ambitious plans around, but we're not going to focus on that until we've got the core absolutely nailed on. So automated prepayments and deferrals, automated accruals based on outstanding documents, whether that's GRNs or unauthorized invoices, depreciation and fixed asset registers, and AI bank rec matching. Auto bank recs is something that is not going to be there on day one, but it's going to be there fairly shortly after. So hopefully that just gives you a sense of where we're at in terms of, look, it's not going to be a half-baked system in September. It's going to be a system that adds a lot of value, probably has some pretty significant wins over what you're currently using, but there is a second phase where we're going to be doing those next bits. But anyway, that's enough for me. I think I'm 2 minutes over my allotted time, Tom. But Tom's now going to take over with the demo. What we're demoing is obviously a pre-production system, so just bear that in mind. All the functionality that Tom goes through is absolutely spot on and is what has been built or is either being built, depending on the functionality, depends where it is on that journey. Look and feel, design is something that we iterate with all the time. So yeah, it's going to give you a really good sense of where we're at, but I expect it will look different in a month, and I expect it will look different in 2 months, and I expect it will look very different in 6 months. It is likely to change because this is a development system in flight, but I'm really excited for you guys to see where we're at. And over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Will. Okay, I'll just bring up my screen share now. Fantastic. Can you see that okay?
Got it. Yeah, one thing I didn't mention is there'll be Q&A at the end. So please, if you get any questions as we go through, drop them in the Q&A and I'll do my best to cover those at the end. But over to you, Tom.
Lovely. Thank you. Great. So Will kind of outlined there the main areas we'll be covering today. And I'm actually going to start with the bank accounts and the bank reconciliation side of things. So on my screen at the moment, you can see the bank account page within the system. Now, really important here is that the system can cater for, those different banking structures that we see in that. So it might be, literally a single bank account shared across all schools in the trust. It could actually be a hybrid scenario, as many of us are familiar with, where perhaps some schools are using that single central account, but others still have maybe some legacy accounts. The system can cater for that. So when we set up our bank accounts, we then essentially allocate schools that are going to be able to interact with that account. That could be all of them, it could be some of them, it could literally just be the central location, and that is just in line with your map structure. There's some other interesting things on this page. So we'll notice here that we're sort of saying we've got various different feed statuses for our bank accounts, and this links in with the open banking side. So just this bottom bank account that I've got in my demo environment here, that's got a nice active feed, bank transactions being automatically fed through into the system. But we'll notice at the top, we've got one that's expired, actually. And so this is one of the security protocols built into open banking. Every kind of 90 days, I think is a bit of a standard. You would look to re-authenticate your open banking feed, and you can do that through the system interface. So in this example, I would go ahead, I would look at this bank account, and just to the right-hand side, I'd open up the bank feed area. It says here your consent has expired. Yeah, no problem at all. I'd come down and say, well, what bank is it that I use? So maybe it's Barclays, and you would connect to bank. Now, in a live scenario, when you hit this button, it's going to pop up the open banking kind of API form where you will authenticate with the bank, and then we'll get that approval to download the bank transactions. In my demo environment, it just says, yeah, hey, great, you've now got your sync. So that is really the link to the bank feeds. That being said, you may have certain accounts, possibly those fund accounts or deposit accounts that don't necessarily have so many transactions going through them every year, and you might not be too bothered about setting up a bank feed, which would be fair enough. And in that case, you can, of course, pop in manual bank statements either via import or by adding statement entries. And if you've got enough transactions, you'd probably look to do a bank feed, which would be fine. But you may say, 2-3 transactions a year or month, we can just add those lines in ourselves. We do control this, so I'm able to add statement entries and import statements for bank accounts that don't have a connected or active bank feed. But if I was to look, for example, at my bank feed that has an active feed, I'm not actually able to edit these transactions directly because they're being managed by the bank feed through open banking. So there is a bit of a control there to prevent the prevent the statements overlapping or getting duplicated or anything like that. Just coming back to my bank account maintenance, there's a few other nice things here. So, of course, we are able to disable bank accounts, particularly in trusts that are maybe moving towards a centralized view. You may have those school level accounts, but you'll reach a point where you potentially want to turn those off. They need to stay there so that you retain the history, but you'd be looking to turn those off so that you can begin to use the single account kind of going forward. So, of course, we've got that disable functionality And just more broadly, when it comes to bank accounts and really any of the pieces of data inside the system, it's all able to be controlled through security. So I today, of course, have access to absolutely everything, but your users, maybe in the central team would have access to everything, but maybe out in the school, not so much. They might only see a subset of the data that's in the system. It's unified in the sense that you won't have to log into this school or that school to access different pieces of information. It's all just presented in a consolidated grid format, and it's controlled with security from there on out. So that's really quite an important point in terms of the design. Now moving towards the sort of bank rec side of things, I can obviously select an account and look to reconcile it. This then takes us into the bank rec screen itself. A couple of kind of important things to say about this screen, really. We don't limit this to a date range. We give you all unreconciled transactions kind of all of the time. And, we recognize some MATs are going to do, perhaps a monthly bank rec and really only interested in reconciling up until the end of the month that we're closing down. But equally, there will be trusts that have such high volume of transactions, you might want to do a daily or weekly bank rec, and therefore this always needs to be up to date, giving you the latest information. Just at the top, we do give you a quick balance check. One of the things with bank feeds and particularly with importing bank statements, it's always useful just to see a number to verify that the data that's come into your finance system does actually match the data that is coming out of the bank. So this just gives you a bit of confidence that, okay, yes, we're reconciling to the right number, which is always an important element here.
Tom, just wanted to dive in quickly with a question. David asked about petty cash and credit cards. I think the assumption is this would work in exactly the same way for credit cards as long as they're open banking access, which I think most credit cards now are. Petty cash would be similar but different. The reconciliation, there's not a statement to reconcile against, but mechanically it would be held as a bank account.
Mechanically, yeah, similar, absolutely that. We might put it in its own ledger, so it might go to petty cash ledger so that it's sort of isolated, but it would work in the same way. But with the credit card point, absolutely. A lot of credit cards now, open banking can attack that information, get it into the system. Even if your bank isn't particularly friendly with credit cards, you can still put credit card statement in the system and do that reconciliation from that point of view. So really useful from a control angle there.
A few questions with asking about different bank providers. The easiest way is to say check with your provider to say if they are open banking compatible, because if they are, yes, and most are. But yeah, there's a few names on here that I kind of recognize. The easiest answer is ask them, can you connect to your statements via open banking? And they will give you that answer. If their answer is yes, our answer is also yes. If the answer is no, I think Tom's also going to talk you through that in a minute.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, that's right. If for whatever reason your bank doesn't, provide that information, we can of course still get the information in via statement import, so you don't have to manually key those out, which would be quite miserable if we're being honest. So, being able to do it in a quick way, whether it's through the feed or through an import, is obviously key to this process. Lovely. So, in terms of the bank rec itself, as you would expect, we can, of course, do a kind of a one-to-many match, a many-to-one match, or a many-to-many match, obviously in line with the sort of information that comes through your bank statement and how that then gets posted in your finance system. So just to give you a bit of an example, I've got this transaction here, obviously backs payment that we've made. And on the right-hand side, I can see, okay, well, that's actually split into two payments on the IMP side. And just to be absolutely clear, the bank statement here is on the left, that's coming in through the feed. And on the right-hand side, I can see essentially the cash book transactions that I posted into IMP. We can see here that I have got a valid match. I can go ahead and match that. That does disappear from the screen. Quite therapeutic, really, when you're working down and it's just disappearing as you've matched them all off. You can, of course, see the matches that you've put in place. So if I then just move over to the matched tab, I can see here, okay, yeah, I matched this item on the bank statement side with these two items on the cash book side. If for whatever reason this was wrong, I'd made an error, of course, I could unmatch that at any point as well. In terms of the reporting around this, you can, of course, run a reconciliation report from this screen. There's no need to run it from this screen. We don't kind of do this as a one-off. You can run this report, you can come back to this report, you can run it in the future. Some systems kind of force you to take that bank rec report kind of now. We haven't designed it that way. You can come back and run this report at any point that makes sense for you. And then just to touch there on the auto match side. So we've got an auto match button, not currently doing anything there. As Will mentioned, we're going to be looking at that AI-based auto bank rec functionality. There's going to be a couple of different elements to that. So as with a lot of AI tools that interact with finance systems, it really all hinges on the confidence rating of the AI. So how confident is it that it can match, this with these two things over here, or this with this other thing over here? And so you'll be able to put some thresholds in the system that say, okay, well, if it's 99% or 98% confident, I'm quite happy to just let it reconcile it on its own. But you might say, if it dips below that, I'd like it still to suggest that match to me so that it saves me the time of having to literally find the stuff on the screen. But I will confirm that I'm happy with that sort of match rather than just allowing it to reconcile it without my intervention as the user. So that will be a really nice way of speeding up the bank rec, particularly for those of you that have really high transaction volumes going through the bank accounts, particularly those single bank accounts covering, 10, 20, 30 schools, whatever it may be. You'll have a huge transaction volume. So that auto match function will really help to speed up that rec process. Fantastic. Okay, so that's kind of a bit of a dive into our current bank account structure, the reconciliation side, the bank feed side, the statements, quite comprehensive, quite a lot going on in there, with more to come in the future as well. So really exciting. We're now going to have a bit of a shift in gears and look at the payment process. So payment runs, how do we generate those? What's that experience? And what sort of options do we have available to us? So I'm just going to go up here into my suppliers and payments section. Incidentally, there are some other things in here. We've got our supplier accounts in there that can be set up, again, controlled with security. So if you do have that single supplier list in here, you can still stratify that by school security levels. We've got, of course, a nice grid that's showing us all of our invoices, credit notes, all their various statuses and things like that. Today, we're going to have a look at the generate payments option. Now, this is very much around batch payments. So, of course, you can still post individual payments in the system. You can post things like sales receipts, as you'd imagine. This is more now looking at the batch payment of supplier invoices, although, you could also use this for things like student bursaries, things like staff expense claims as well, if they go through your finance system as opposed to your payroll. So quite a reusable tool in that regard. It doesn't have to just be suppliers. It can apply to those other areas where you need to make payments. So just looking at the screen here, we're just probably worth looking at some of the ones we've done in the past. We've got a few payment runs that we've done previously. We're getting a bit of an indication of when the payments were made on these ones or when they are due to be made. We can then see which schools' invoices were included on these payment runs. And again, this is a really important principle. You should be able to do a payment run for an individual school. You should be able to do a payment run for a group or cluster of schools, or indeed you should be able to do a payment run for all schools in the trust simultaneously and just have that done as a singular process. That is something, flows through the design of the system, whether it's one school, multi or all, applies to almost all the screens and all the different functions and the way that they work fundamentally. Just worth pointing out, actually, that this payment run hasn't been approved yet. So we've got payment documents that are still awaiting approval. And for that reason, I'm not actually able to download my BACS file or send my remittances. Of course, when we get those approved, I'll be wanting to get that BACS file downloaded, get those remittances out to the suppliers as well. So again, just a little bit of control in there to prevent some confused suppliers who have had a remittance but maybe not had the payment yet. Let's just walk through now the new payment run process and get a feel for that. So I'm going to generate a new payment run here. And the first thing I get is this kind of parameters page. This is just setting all the information that we're going to need in the next step of the payment run itself. I do need to give it a reference. Today I'm going to be a little bit lazy and just call it payment run demo. You probably want a bit of a naming convention in there that's more helpful than that. You might do the date in reverse order. You might put a bit of a thing on there saying this is suppliers, this is staff, whatever it may be, something that helps you identify this a little bit easier in the future. Next down, I've got my list of schools, and essentially I'm just being asked here to decide which schools' invoices would I like to include in this payment run. As I say, it could be all of them. It could be a combination of them. It could just be a single school. Another really important point about this is that if you have those school level users, whether that be SBMs or the finance administration role, and they want to do their own payment run, of course, they would only have access to select their own school. So again, we don't circumvent any of that security in any of these screens. It's all respectful of the security profile that's been applied to any given user. And again, just to bang the drum, if you're a person that works across two schools, finance business partner, shared SBM, those sorts of things, of course, I would just have access to the two schools, the three schools. So very intuitive in terms of the way that fits into your MAT structure. Just casting my eye down, I'm then being asked for a finance code. I've just got one option in the list, and it's trade creditors. Now, we've built some validation into the system here that basically says, okay, what ledgers do we have? Which of those ledgers are supposed to be able to generate payments? Only show me the finance codes that relate to those ledgers. So in my system, I don't pay staff, don't pay student bursaries, I do pay suppliers. Nice and simple. I will just select trade creditors. But if I did pay something like student bursaries, if I did register my staff expense claims on the system, we would have configured the nominal code in there. You would then see, student bursaries, you would see staff expenses, and you'd be able to select the finance code that you want to pay. So I'm going to go for my trade creditors here. It then, of course, wants to know which bank account are we making this payment from. So I'm going to go for my main bank account here. Towards the end of the process, it's going to post a load of documents to all the purchase ledger supplier accounts. It's just going to want to know what document type to use. So I'm just going to say this is a BACS payment run. Probably not very many of us who issuing checks anymore, and you're probably always going to select BACS payment in here, but we do need to give you the ability should there be a different sort of payment taking place. And then really importantly, we've got this filter at the bottom. So due dates up until. This has just been designed to allow you to almost pre-filter the list of invoices that you want to pay. So there's a few different scenarios here. You might be entering the summer holidays. You want to make sure you've captured absolutely everything that's going to fall due between now and the end of the holidays. We want to just get that final payment run done so we can go and have a break. You'd probably leave this empty and just collect absolutely everything that's outstanding, pull that into your payment run. But equally, you might have more of a keen eye on the cash flow in the trust. And you might be saying, well, look, why don't we just pay things that are going to fall due between now and the next time we do a payment run? And you're always doing this rolling payment run where really you're only releasing the amount of cash that you're obligated to. You retain those cash balances a little bit longer and just get a slightly smoother cash flow as a result of that. So you can then almost filter this invoice list based on those due dates. So quite a useful function there. So having filled in each of those parameters, I'm now going to move over to the invoice list itself. Now this screen is giving me all of the invoices grouped by supplier that met the parameters that I set on the previous screen. So essentially here, I've got all the different balances, and there's a few different ways I can interact with this screen. So for example, I might say, yep, I want to pay this entire supplier. You might say, I want to pay absolutely everything and just select everything. However, we do have a supplier that's got a credit balance, so we've been wanting to take those out because we can't pay that. Of course, we need to wait for an invoice to come in, or maybe we're expecting a refund or something. So that supplier does need to come out. But actually, within each supplier, we could then begin to choose. Well, okay, do we want to take this invoice out? Do we want to include this credit note? We might be expecting a refund for this credit note, so we'll leave that alone and pay the other balances. So we can get quite granular with. Are we paying individual invoices? We're paying whole suppliers. Do we want to take anything out and things like that? There's also just a few useful things on the screen. So we do have the sort code account number coming through there. It's reasonable to say that you won't necessarily be wanting to check that every single time, but certainly some spot checks, some sample tests can be useful just to kind of verify the data in the ledger is accurate. Just at the bottom of the screen, then it's now saying, well, okay, you've selected 10 invoices covering 5 suppliers, and we're doing a total payment today of £53,000, or a little bit more than that. And it's then giving me a button to post. Now, when I press post, depending on what you've set up in the system, a couple of different things might happen. If I've attached a workflow, an approval workflow to my payment run process here, then actually it's not going to immediately post the documents. It'll create the payment documents and it will send them off for approval. If you haven't got an approval set up because you don't need one, or you actually rely on the approval on the bank side more so than the approval here, then you don't have to attach that workflow. And when I post here, it will post to the creditor accounts, settle those balances, and clear everything off. So I can just now post. And And that now comes back into my payment run screen, and I can see, okay, we're making a payment on the 5th Feb. This is posted. I didn't require an approval on this one. And so from here, I'd be looking to download that BACS file, get that imported to the bank, and then I'd be looking to send my remittances using the little send remittances function here. Just a little bit of a tip, it's always worth getting that BACS file imported to the bank, make sure they accept it, they validate it, they're happy with it, prior to sending those remittances, because, we probably all had that horror story happen once or twice where the bank reject our file and we need to work out what's going on. So just useful to do that in a sensible sequence to make sure that you're okay to release those remittance advices to your suppliers. Fantastic. So bit of a look there at our payment run process. Again, the impact on multi-school, single school, multi-bank accounts, and some of the features around that in terms of including, excluding balances and sending those remittances out and so on. Take another bit of a shift now and take a look at our VAT process. Now, of course, largely trusts are either using the VAT 100 or the VAT 126 scheme, and the system does cater for both of those scenarios. So just in our organisation settings, I've got this little cog in the top right-hand area. My system administrator would have access to this, and in here we can simply toggle what scheme we're currently using at the moment. I'm currently set under VAT 126. I will run through the VAT return process twice just to show you the slight differences in behaviour when we engage with the VAT return process under a 126 versus under a VAT 100 arrangement. So first and foremostly, I'll come into my VAT area and I'll go into my VAT returns. Now, we do see the VAT return history here. We do see the date range, we see the balances. We can also drill in and see the detail behind each of those VAT returns. So this is one that was done previously. I can see all the transactions that were included, those on the sales side, those on the purchase side. That, of course, can be exported if you need to do some analysis. Although this is a completed VAT return, if you were partway through a VAT return, you might want to export the transactions if you're doing a bit of partial exemption maths, work out what we need to post in as a write-off journal. That can be a useful thing to do. So getting the data out is quite fundamental there. We're going to go through and set up a new return here. So if I say new VAT return, and essentially it takes me through a guided wizard process. Just before I start the process, it's worth saying that at any point you can abandon this process and come back to it later. So you might get in, you think, well, hang on a minute, not quite happy with these transactions. We've noticed some problems. I can just abandon this return, revisit it later. Maybe I want to resolve my issues and then come back and do that VAT return. So we can certainly abandon this process any way through, all the way up until it's posted. So first and foremostly, we're seeing here, okay, we've got the from and to date for our VAT return. So we're doing it for the month of January. See, on the 29th of January, a bit naughty, I probably ought not be doing this, but it's a demo system, so that's okay. We've got our VAT return reference. Again, you can put something that's more helpful in that box if you have a particular naming convention that you would, prefer. And then again, towards the end of this process, a bit like the payment run process, actually, we're going to be posting some documents. We're going to be posting, well, in this case, we're going to be clearing the input control account down to control. In the case of a VAT 100, we'll be clearing input output down to control. And we just need to know what sort of journal that is. So I've set up a specific VAT return journal in my system that allows me to do that. So that's the document type I've selected. Now, the first step in the wizard, or well, the second step, I should say, is actually prior dated transactions. And this was something we heard loud and clear when we were doing the research, getting the feedback in this space. One of the frustrations potentially is that, you do your VAT return process and maybe that works well, but you come to look at your trial balance, you come to reconcile your control accounts, and actually you're going, well, hang on a moment. Our VAT control account doesn't necessarily balance to the outstanding amounts on the VAT returns themselves. And you kind of go, well, where's the difference here? Almost always, in our experience, that has come down to prior dated transactions whereby, for various reasons, these transactions weren't included in the VAT return that they were supposed to be included on. So it could be that maybe the period close down didn't happen on time and these invoices slipped in after the VAT return was done. That's a possibility. Or equally, when you were doing the VAT return process last time, you might have had a problem with these transactions and you might have specifically unticked them to exclude them from that VAT return with the intention of resolving whatever that issue was a bit later on. And we're then presenting those back to you to say, hey, we've identified these transactions were in prior periods. They have not yet been claimed on the VAT. Do you want to include them in this VAT return? Probably advisable to do so. So that first step is just giving me the ability to review those transactions. The next step is essentially the transactions posted in the current period. Now, again, we do have the ability, as mentioned on the previous step, to exclude a transaction. So that's very helpful if you're the person who's responsible for getting the VAT return done, needs to be done today. Really important we get this task finished. But again, if you notice something that's not right, what do I do? Do I abandon? Do I go and resolve? I might not be the person that knows how to resolve. It might be somebody else. So it's really important that you've got the ability to exclude transactions from that return, safe in the knowledge that they will come onto the next return in the prior dated section. So we never lose anything. It doesn't fall into a black hole. It will get included in a VAT return. It might just have a bit of a lag on it. So that's really quite useful. And in this situation, I can spot some mistakes. So I'm trying to do a VAT 126 claim. And so, realistically, I shouldn't have any VAT on sales transactions. I can see there's 2 that do. That's probably a mistake. Now, I've not got very many transactions in my demo system, so it's very easy visually to just see, okay, I've got those 2 problems. Obviously, in your environments where you're going to have a lot more volume, it's going to be much easier to filter then in the top right-hand side to say, well, okay, if I want to see the sales transactions, I'll filter to sales. And again, if I'm a VAT 126 refund claim, I'm very much looking to exclude these from this process so that I don't muddy the waters on the actual return. Really important that the intention is then to go and solve these, get the VAT taken off them. Maybe you're going to implement an additional security control so it can't happen in the future. That kind of thing would be, wise in terms of follow-up. From there, then I come to the next step. And because we're doing a VAT 126 refund claim here, I do then get the ability to download my VAT 126 report. And of course, I'll need to submit that to HMRC to get my refund. And then the final step there is to post the VAT transaction. I'll just select the period and year in which I want to make that posting. And again, that may be going into the period in which the VAT return relates to, might go into the following period, really depends on your month-end close down schedule, who does what at each stage. We're going to take you through a few of the features available on the finance periods in terms of phased close down, and that might help inform you in terms of how this posting would look. Now, I'm actually going to abandon this VAT return because I'd love to just almost now activate my VAT 100 and just roll through the process again, but just look at the few differences that then exist. Now, first and foremostly, if we're doing a VAT 100, we're going to need to connect to MTD. Okay, so we've got this MTD page where I need to connect to HMRC. All right, now at the bottom of the page here, it's going to want my API credentials with HMRC. I'm in a sandbox mode at the moment, so I don't actually connect, but you guys, of course, will actually connect to HMRC. You'd come and hit the connection, assuming your credentials are correct. You're going to get the connection come through here. It will show that it's active, and you will be told when it expires. A bit like the bank feeds, HMRC, the bank feeds, a lot of these external systems that we interface with provide a temporary access or a temporary token that's 3 months, 9 months, whatever it may be, but it needs to be periodically refreshed. And so the system does just then report to you, okay, this is a valid connection up until this date. Make sure you come in on that date and just do as a reconnection there. So that's the first bit, really key bit that changes. We need to do that MTD configuration. When I then come in to do my VAT return, I'll go into the new VAT return process. And largely, the first 5 steps of this are very similar. Okay, so I won't, go through all of these again. We can see we still get the prior dated, still get the current period. Obviously, we still get the ability to review the VAT return at large. This time, we're not offered the VAT 126 report, but we can download transaction detail. We can view the full VAT report to do some analysis there. We do still, of course, need to select what year and period we're posting the VAT journal into. But now the final step of the process is actually to submit this to HMRC. So we will agree that we will declare that we agree that this VAT return is accurate, and we'll submit that to HMRC. Now, what then happens is we want to be getting almost a receipt reference from HMRC, confirmation of receipt fundamentally, so you know that that's worked. And of course, now we're simply waiting for our refund to arrive, at which point you'll match it off to the balance on the VAT control account. So two kind of versions of that there in terms of 126, in terms of 100, very similar processes. It's really up until that last step where you'll either be submitting or won't via MTD. And of course, the 126 claim will just get submitted on the HMRC website separately. Amazing. So during that process, I just touched on the finance periods. So we'll just expand into that a little bit now. If I come into my period end menu, I've got my finance periods. Now, of course, we can set up the periods, the years and periods in here. What I'm really interested in today is more so the financial period statuses. So again, we listened and we heard that, really for trusts, it's important to be able to implement a phased close down. And what that means is, some section of users has access to a period to make postings, and then maybe you close it off to that section of users, and then it's just this other section of users that can use that period. So maybe an example might be, all the users in the system can post to an open period. So that would be my open status. And then maybe when I move it into the period end routine, perhaps only the SBMs in a school can use the period end. When I move to final adjustments, maybe it's only the management accountants in the central team that can post to that final adjustments kind of period access level. These aren't really predefined. You get to allocate these security roles to your users and essentially define who those groups of users are that should be able to interact with your month end at the different phases of your month end schedule. So this, although we've given these kind of words, period end, final adjustment, closed, you get to define who sits in those groups, and therefore you can control that month end, much better, really. When we do come to fully close a period, we will then be offered a month-end wizard. So again, we've used a kind of a stepped process to the month-end close down here. And what we've got to show you today is this first step in the wizard around incomplete documents. Now, largely with incomplete documents, they're going to be unauthorized documents. And one of the things in many systems that we see, let's say, you put an invoice on in January, it doesn't get approved in January, and then you try to approve it in February. Well, if the period's not been closed yet, would you like that to be in January? Probably, but if the period's been closed, you really want that to shift to February, okay? So this is saying, all right, well, we've identified all of these things that are in January, and you're about to close January. So what do you want to do with all of these things? And the answer is, in my case, I want to shift them from January to February, whereby I would expect my approvers to sign these things off, and they'll be realised as actuals in the February accounting period. Now, Will mentioned that some of these other functions are going to be coming in Jan. So linked to that previous step, we'd like to offer you the ability to accrue those invoices that you've shifted from January to February, because you might have been expecting those actuals to land in Jan. And the fact that they haven't means that management accounts might be light in terms of some of your spend. And so that then triggers, okay, do we need to accrue those costs that we've just shifted out of Jan, accrue those back into Jan as part of this process? We're expecting the invoice to land in Feb, and then we'll, of course, match that invoice with the accrual. We'll be happy. We've got our actual where we wanted it to be. We've got the accrual reversed off where we wanted it to be. Very similar, the next step that we'll be looking to offer is around outstanding GRN accruals. Now, this will present you a full list of GRNs, and you might choose to accrue everything, but you might say, I'll apply a filter and I'll only accrue things that are, let's say, over £1,000, for instance, or whatever, your materiality threshold is in that case. And another really important one around the prepayments and deferrals. Rather than us posting all of your prepayments and deferrals at the moment somebody posts an invoice, actually what we do is we say, okay, we see that you've posted an invoice with a prepayment date range on it, but we're not going to post that straight away. We're going to hold that on the prepayment schedule, and then during the month-end process, we will present that schedule in this screen, and you'll be able to say, oh yeah, I'm happy with that, we'll post. But it also just gives you the opportunity to go, oh, there are some in here that I'm not happy with. Maybe the person entering the invoice wasn't quite sure, put the wrong date range, put a date range when they didn't want one, and so on. This just gives you that chance to say, yes, I'm happy with what I'm about to release in terms of prepayments and deferrals. That we feel is a much better approach than prepayments and deferrals just being released into future periods all the time, much less control, difficult to keep a lid on in terms of what's happening there. So this feels like it adds a lot of control to that process. The final step then is to say, well, look, given everything we've done on the previous steps, here's everything we're about to do to your January period, what we're about to shift into your February period. And of course, when we think about the accruals, the GRN accruals and the prepayments, it'll be saying, yeah, we're about to release all of this, we're about to accrue all of this, and just give you that final chance to say, yes, I'm happy. If I am happy, I will, of course, then post and close, where post is moving those invoices from one period to the next. And then, of course, it will close down the period. Our period close status is quite strict. So even a system administrator couldn't accidentally post a journal in a closed period. System administrator could, of course, reopen a period if there was a compelling reason to do so, but closed means closed. I can't post into a closed period just because I have system admin access. That's a bit of a risk. You have to make that decision to open and then repost. Or you might decide to move it back to final adjustments if you wanted it to be sort of open, but only to a subsection of users. That's perfectly fine, but closed means closed, and we're quite clear on that. Fantastic. I just wanted to spend the last few moments looking at how I might set up an approval for a journal in my system. This is going to be a really simple example of how you might look to configure new documents, set up different settings for your documents, and in this case, attach a workflow to a document. In my user profile, so under Tom Hunter's user profile, I've said he is responsible for journals. So that's great. That bit's done, but I haven't enabled journal approvals yet. So how do I do that? Well, I'd come into my document type configuration here. I've got all of my documents down the left-hand side, and within each of these documents, there are various settings that touch various different things. What control account does this use? Does this have a workflow attached to it, and so on and so forth. If I come down to my journal, I can see that at the moment, I've got no approval steps configured for my journal, and I'm also not requiring approval. So if I just go ahead and edit this journal document type, I want to say, yeah, I want approval on debit and credit entries for journals, and then come down and say, well, what kind of workflow do I want to build here? And this is where you've got quite a lot of flexibility. You might say, well, I want to build a workflow based on the code that gets used. If somebody posts a journal to this code, I want to know about it and I want to approve it. But if they post a journal to some other code, I'm not bothered about that. That can just go through. So we could base that on finance code. We could say, based on school, we have a different approver by school for journals. You could even say, well, I want payroll journals to be approved, but I don't want general journals to be approved. So you've got all of these options available. I'm going to go for the simplest example here that basically says all journals go to Tom. A journal is a document type. So all I need to do is take the document type out of the available steps and shove it over into the selected steps of my workflow. I'm also going to specify that that's mandatory. This is a really useful way to control when you're building new workflows. If I say that that's mandatory and then I've missed an approver somewhere, the system's going to tell me. Whereas if I don't make it mandatory and I have missed an approver somewhere, the system won't tell me. Now, there are good use cases for that, and I'll just take a moment to give you one of those. If you think about something like a related party transaction, you might have a supplier in your selected steps of the workflow, but you couldn't very well make that mandatory because not all of your suppliers are related parties, only some of them are. So there are really good reasons to make workflow steps mandatory, but equally good reasons to leave them optional. And that's probably the best case I could give you as an example for now. So I'm quite happy with that, and I can save those changes, but there's just a bit of nervousness now around, well, I think I've done this workflow. I think I've built it and I think it's working, but I'd really rather not test it by posting a journal in the system and seeing what happens, because what happens if I'd got it wrong? Do I have to post another journal? I'm cluttering the system up with a load of stuff that isn't very helpful. So we do provide a workflow preview. Now, this is a simple preview where you can pop in some sample values and say, well, what would happen if I'd posted a journal with some of these values? And then the system will say, I'm just going to go over a really simple one. What would happen if I posted a journal for £500? Now, I could say school department. I could say, what happens when Tom does it, but at the moment, I just want to say what happens if I post a journal for £500. If I refresh, on the right-hand side, it's saying, well, great. We've identified that the journal approver is Tom. Fantastic. He can't self-approve journals. That might be a gap. actually, because if I post my own journals, then at the minute there's no approvers. We might want to look at that. And that's probably because I don't have a self-approval limit, but I do have the approval limit to sign off journals for £500. So this tells me that my workflow is correct and it will work. This preview follows the same logic as the actual workflow in the system. So this just gives you that assurance that what you've implemented here is actually correct and will be followed through in the system. And then, of course, to your heart's content, program in example values. Or what if this was 50 million? What if it was, Mike that raised it instead of Tom, and so on and so forth. And this just gives you that confidence that the workflow you put together is correct prior to, implementing it for real in your system. Fantastic. So we've covered quite a lot today. That's everything I was going to show you in the demo. I'll hand back over to Will. We've got a few things to close out with, and we'll do a bit of Q&A now.
Well done, Tom. Yeah, I'm knackered. I'm trying to do. I think I've answered 39 questions so far. I've still got a few to go. Look,
Oh, well done.
I'm doing my best. Hopefully the answers have been sufficient. If there's any that I haven't answered effectively or properly, please do flag and give me a shout. So there's two themes that actually I wanted to address because they're good questions and I don't have a good answer. And actually, we need to go to the spec and understand what we're going to do about it. So the first one is around direct debit suppliers, how to ensure their invoices don't appear on a payment run. Now, a easy fudge is to give them payment terms of 300 days and those invoices are never due. That would work. But I don't think we've actually got anything anywhere that says this, or do we, Tom?
Fair point. I think it's a simple one. We just need to filter out suppliers with that payment method. But that's a really good point. I'm not sure we've got that in there at the moment.
Yeah, so thank you for that. And also disputing invoices. So I answered a dispute question with, well, of course, in the perfect world, a disputed invoice wouldn't have been approved, and therefore unapproved invoices don't appear on the payment run, which is correct in the perfect world. But somebody rightly flagged me up and said, dream on, Will. Doesn't always work like that. Sometimes invoices are approved. How do we then dispute it? I don't think we've got that in a spec, Tom, or do we?
No, again, fair point. We did talk about disputes, but I don't think we've got that in there at the moment. We'll be adding a dispute button.
Yeah, and look, we really all of these questions on all of the webinars we've done today, we go through them the same day with our product team to make sure, one, our answers are accurate, two, the functionality that we've defined deals with all of, and it's funny, the questions we often get are the super edge cases. And so for us, it's a great way of testing our functionality. And we'll be doing exactly the same with all these questions. So thank you very much. Okay, so I've done that one. I don't know if there's any, Tom, that you can see or want to take.
Just think.
So the other one while you're looking is partial exemption. Okay, so there's been a few questions around partial exemption, and we've been very deliberate around how we do and don't deal with it. Okay, so what we enable is for you to create as many tax codes as you want with as many VAT codes as you want. You're also able to do the full analysis on every single transaction in the system because every line has the full VAT information on it, and also every VAT line has the full I&E information on it. So on both sides of the transactions, you're able to do the analysis on the other side. We've not added any standard partial exemption functionality purely because we've not come across a standard method of partial exemption that exists within our customer base. And therefore, the solution is you can do whatever analysis you want, but you will have to do that yourself and do a manual adjustment. Now, if we align and everybody's doing it in the same way, of course, it's something we can add. I don't think we're there yet in terms of the conversations we've had. So that is our approach. God, Tom, I'll cut you off.
No, it's all right. I've just responded to one in the chat. I don't think I can see any others that we've missed.
In the open, there's open in the Q&A rather than the chat.
Oh, we've got Q&A. We do, yeah. Okay.
Can you do a manual accrual as well? Yes, absolutely. You can have as many document types. So you could post a journal that is an accrual, or you could have a document type called accrual, or you could have a different accrual document type for each school, so you can see accruals by school. Yes, you can do a manual accrual. Is the month end close a central process, or can it be done by school? Tom, I'll tee you up for that one.
Yeah, so it's a central process because that period control is driven from the system administration point of view, and almost always the system administrator will be a central person.
Yeah. So I normally process the VAT after the month end and usually post into the prior period. It keeps it tidier. Would this still be possible? Yes. Well, as long as you've not closed the period before you go and do your VAT return, as part of that period close, I would use one of those period close, semi-closed statuses, do your VAT return. So you could close the financial period for end users, and one of those jobs you do while it's in that kind of frozen state is the VAT return. But yeah, you can achieve that, Karen. Is there any functionality to accrue to budget? For example, water charges for us are a non-PO invoice. Invoices can be delayed depending on the supplier. Accrue to budget. So, Chloe, absolutely. So, as part of the vision around budget-led finance, exactly that. Exactly that. That is not something that we've got for V1 for January, but when Tom mentioned about accruing things based off document types, one of those things is our budget. We're in a really unique position to automate accruals because what is an accrual? And a thing that hasn't happened yet financially, or a thing you haven't been invoiced for but has happened. Well, a great source of information for that is your budget. And therefore, it isn't there on September functionality, Chloe, but it will be there in that second batch around accruals functionality. Rather than journal, can you edit the original posting as you can with Zero? Yes and no, and apologies to David, who I answered his question earlier with a yes and no. I was supposed to add a part two to that answer, but I pressed enter. I went back and corrected it. So the yes is, yeah, look, you can edit any transaction you want in the system, but a very strong principle that we've applied is you cannot change a post document. What that means in reality is when you change a posted document, it creates a reversal of that original document and it creates a corrected document. From the UI, you won't see the fact that there's three transactions, but from a system and a bomb-proof audit trail perspective, we've got some die-hard accountant purists in the team that would just computer says no on changing a thing that is posted. So we've given it the ability to change whatever you want, or it feels like you're changing it. So the functionality feels identical to what you do at the moment. Just go in and change it. But in reality, that creates a reverse document and a corrected document. So there's three documents, but the functionality feels the same. Okay, we have VAT codes in Sage, and it gives us a breakdown that we put into spreadsheets that calculates our partial exemption. Yeah, fine. I mean, you can do exactly the same. You can break down your entire VAT total by tax code, by nominal code, by department, and it sounds like that's going to work in exactly the same way, David. Um, Look, I suppose I know we're slightly over, so we're going to stick around and answer these questions. If you've got to go or if you've already gone, look, thanks very much. What I'm going to do is quickly just follow up with a couple extra slides. And we'll also stick around and ask the question. I know Tom is beavering away at those. So just in terms of follow-up before we go, a reminder of the timeline. We've got a webinar in March that will do the full release. And we've also got our Customer Connect conference on the 3rd of March in May. I know lots of you are already registered. We'll be spending a lot of time at that conference dealing with or releasing IMP Finance and running through it. There's a QR code there. You won't avoid our communications around this, so please do get involved. Great day last year, full day full of all things IMP. And then lastly, if you're unable to make that, but you want to see the finance system launch 2 days after on the 5th of March, is the final webinar in the series, which is the full product walkthrough. Okay, so please scan the QR code there. All right, back to Q&A. But look, if you do need to go, thanks very much for getting the time out of your diary. Hopefully it's been useful. Hopefully you're pleased with the progress we're making. We're really excited. There's still questions that come out of today around disputes and direct debits. It's nice that there aren't many that we're now getting to that we haven't considered. But look, there's no such thing as a finished software product, right? We're changing things on planner, on ICFP, on purchasing. There's never a time where you go, ta-da, finished. And we're up for that challenge, and look, we'll keep listening. So thanks for all the questions, but we will stick around and answer as many as we can.
I've just been getting through them.
Cool. Can you have more than one company with different VAT status? So no. So if you've got different VAT numbers, if you're not in a VAT group, that will require a separate database. Okay, so you'll have two logins, you'll have two IMP finances, one for one company, one for another company. If you've got multiple companies within the same VAT group, that's fine. But I think HMRC are pretty adamant if you're not in a VAT group, you mustn't mix the transactions. Unless it's a trading stub that is not VAT registered and there is no VAT or it's not VATable, that's kind of fine because all of their transactions would be outside of scope. But if you've got multiple VATable entities, they would need separate databases.
We've got a great question from Sarah. So, will we be able to drill down from a cost center report to source documents? The answer there is yes, and more broadly, reports will be drillable from source documents. And actually, further than that, if documents are allocated with one another, they can drill to each other as well. So there'll be a lot of drillability within the reports, but also between documents.
I love that word, but it is absolutely true. Like going on a trail, you start drilling in one thing and then you go across to what it's been allocated across. You end up in the bank account, you end up on the bank statement. There is no walls on drillability, which is a great way of putting it. But that also drills all the way back through the purchasing process. And that's really worth remembering in terms of who raised this, who did the GRN, who queried it, who authorized it. All of that is on that drill. I was going to do something that Mr. Trump said. Was it drill, baby, drill? I don't know why that just sprung to my mind, but we are not using that at
No,
IMP.
not using
But
that. Yeah.
you are able to drill through documents as much as you require. That's a much safer way of putting it.
And we just got a question from Katie on the prepayments. Yeah, so Katie, that is something you'll be able to do on the entry of an invoice, also deferrals on the entry of things like income journals, sales invoices. But that is something we're currently targeting for Jan. So not September. That'll be shortly after in Jan. Just to be really clear on that one.
Yeah, and when we say Jan, it's very we wanted to be really deliberate about what is and isn't there for September. Now, it might be October, it might be November, it might be December, it might even be February. But, ultimately, this functionality, when we have live customers and products, they drive our priorities. So we'll be very much dependent on what do our customers want us to do, and those priorities may change, but we're customer led as an organization, and if we say, well, we want to do a really cool accrual based off something, but none of our customers do, ultimately it's customers that lead priorities. So yeah, we just wanted to be really, because obviously up until September, we're deciding priorities. So we wanted to be really clear. Kind of following that, it's very much customer led roadmap. Is there a consolidation option with different companies? Good question, Claire. There certainly is via Excel. I don't think we have any reports that would go across multiple companies at the moment. But we do already have groups of schools that are work very closely with other groups of schools, or they're diocese led, and we therefore give them reporting functionality across multiple databases. So we already have the technology that exists, but it is quite specific to those use cases, Claire. So be keen for picking up that conversation with you.
Oh, 7 more
Right.
questions. I think we've cleared the decks.
We've cleared the decks. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody who's stuck around for questions. Well done, Tom, as well. Really good demo. For the bits that I saw when I wasn't beavering away.
Feverishly typing, yeah.
Our email addresses are on screen, so that hopefully we've answered questions. Where we said we're going to follow up with you, we absolutely will. if you have any questions about anything IMP or IMP Finance, our email addresses are on screen now. Would love to speak to anyone individually. So thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks, everybody.
Sorry, I cannot work out how to end a webinar. There we go. The button's moved. Enjoy your week. Thanks, everyone.